call up this presentation, but before I do, it's delightful to see everybody. How has your week been? Good?
Good.
And it finished our vaccinations yesterday.
Yay!
Yay.
Congratulations.
Yes,
Yay.
me too.
Finished ours Monday.
Congratulations.
I finished mine on Thursday.
I say finish until they decide we need a booster sometime this fall or something.
Yeah, well, Jim Muncie had said that he believes that it'll get to be an annual event like the
Yeah.
flu shot.
Yep.
No surprise.
All right,
No.
well, that's good news. Here we are. Okay. Well, Bailey, I really appreciated your comment in the service today that life is meant for enjoyment of God's creation and the service of others. That really just, I think, sets the tone for what we're here to do in this conversation. We're talking today about what civility might look like. Although I have to say, in Mr. Suarez's video, he talks a lot about not necessarily what civility looks like, but what our current tactics look like when we're having conversation, and they're really somewhat less than civil. So it's an interesting title to today's lesson, but we'll get into that in just a minute. Starting with our prayer for the human family. O God, you made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which can infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love and work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your purposes on earth. That in your good time, all nations and races may serve you in harmony around your heavenly throne. Through Jesus Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Amen. In looking where we've been, today is our number 3 in a series of 4 lessons. The first lesson we talked about the challenge of civility, and the video talked about how our conversations have gotten increasingly difficult when we talk to each other in political forums and also in some social forums. Every week we've discussed our experiences and insights about discourse today, talked about the necessity of working as one people while we struggle over our differences rather than maintaining walls and disparate groups. And in the midst of these difficulties, we've asked ourselves, what can we do? We're seeking to learn tools on how to heal and conduct civil conversations. Last week, the video emphasized our need to act from our core beliefs. Those core beliefs include humility, being merciful, and honoring God, seeking to understand, and to determine how best to respond to situations. And that varies depending on the situation. We talked about having forbearance, listening, love, empathy, and sympathy. And again, in doing that, we seek to find shared goals and values and acknowledge that people will have convictions different from ourselves. And we continued to ask, what can we do? We had some great conversations offline after last Sunday's lesson, and we've shared some resources, and I've made a list of those resources later in today's presentation. We'll review that. So anything we want to say about where we've been to date before we start in on the video? We talked about the definition of comity in our first video. That's courtesy and considerate behavior towards others. Last week we discussed pluralism, and that's where we have a social system with mutual respect for each other's differing cultures, and where people can feel free to express their culture and participate in our larger society without prejudice. And today you'll hear Ray mention the term stasis when we're talking about what does civility look like. And stasis is defined as a state of equilibrium, a state of balance, or a state of being stagnant. It is the alternate. Oh, it's already turned up a lot, so that you may need to turn your volume down when I get started.
A workable civility has to mean granting your opponent the privilege of being seen to operate in good faith. Here's what I mean by that. One of the political motifs of our times has been the steady migration of what we say and how we act toward each other toward one that's not only dripping with contempt, but also marked by the willingness to declare in public that our opponents are not only wrong, but bad, and are trying to work their will out of bad motives. We are right and good. Our opponents are not only wrong, not only people we disagree with, but evil. I've long despaired over the tone and tactics of the last 50 years of American battles, for instance, over abortion rights. In the wars over abortion, I see everything that's wrong with the way we do politics in 21st century America, and especially in the way we wield religion as a weapon in trying to get our way. Rhetorical mortar rounds are shot from right to left and from left to right, saying over and over again that people who would preserve abortion rights don't care about women, hate children, kill babies, and are only sham believers in any religious code. Abortion itself has changed remarkably in the 5 decades since Roe v. Wade, but the war has remained very much the same, with both sides clinging to outmoded arguments and clinging to their contempt for the other side. Though I must say, the worst offenders in this regard are the anti-abortion forces. This they will not allow, for instance, as a gambit from the other side. I don't want to see another frightened teenager feel that she has no other choice. I'm with you on a lot of things. What can we do together? What's demanded of the abortion rights forces from those who would make the practice illegal in all circumstances is complete capitulation, a total denunciation of the practice, even though they know full well that will never happen. I've long been convinced that if breakaway renegade forces could whisper to each other, look, what could we do to have fewer abortions in America? What would that look like? Could I loosen my grip on your neck in this endless scrap? If we could agree on things that would make abortion less frequent by making them less needed. If renegade forces in the artificially drawn dividing lines of this conflict could agree that some really easy things could be done to make abortions less necessary and less frequent, would that be a good thing? Well, not if you want everything, and not if you want the war to continue. Leaving getting everything you want as the only possible outcome you'll accept is a sad feature of our politics today. Leaders dazzling their supporters with the prospect of getting everything they want is an unfortunate deception that keeps some battles going on forever. Because as I mentioned earlier, compromise is now surrender. And when you're on a crusade, nothing but breaching the gates of Jerusalem is going to be accepted as victory. Singles are rejected, home runs only, please. And so we get stasis, combatants so in love with the combat that they seem to have forgotten the reason for the battle in the first place. Thus, for some Americans, universal single payer becomes the single acceptable answer to healthcare's challenges, while tens of millions of Americans remain uninsured, and we're locked in never-ending combat with people who will contribute millions to try and make sure health insurance companies can operate to the extent possible, almost completely unregulated and in a way that locks those millions of people out. And that system, that battle, the way it's being fought today, allows countless lost years of life because people cannot afford coverage or consistent care in what we often call the best healthcare system in the world. Our problems aren't intractable. The way we fight them seems fated to make them intractable. How you break out of this prison of our own making may be the toughest question of all, and I concede that. But it requires the very forbearance, listening, love, empathy, and sympathy that I talked about at the very beginning. That's what a person of faith would offer, buoyed by a belief that the mustard seed planted today gives shade and home to countless birds, just not for a while.
A lot packed into that.
Heard over time of groups that get together to discuss such topics, as Ray mentioned. And the point is to not win or not come completely to the middle. And that's what he's kind of talking about. And they really get into a discussion of what can we all agree on, or what can we do together to accomplish the same purpose.
I think I might have actually mentioned something last week that sometimes the fight is just about the fight. There's no goal, there's nothing, it's just the fight.
So you don't see any way forward out of the fight, Dan?
Yes, of course, there's always a way forward. But for some of these things, like the issue that Ray just mentioned, this ain't going away anytime soon. The healthcare, the issues with healthcare have a better chance of being, in my opinion, of being solved than abortion rights. They're just, that second one is just so emotionally charged. And of course, my opinion, again, it's just my opinion, most of the elections these days are not done on the basis of issues, they're done on the basis of emotion.
They're also done on the basis of power and wealth and greed. I think we've made our creation a marketplace, following from today's sermon, that continues in many forms and facets and contributes to the tactics that people are deploying. I've got a couple questions that we can use to guide more discussion here. So at the outset of the video, Ray talked about granting our opponent the privilege of being seen to operate in good faith. But how, it's difficult to do that, and how can we do that if a lot of people are operating out of the mindset of we're in this to get everything we want, or everything I want, and that we're vilifying our opponents? How do we reconcile this? And then secondly, do you agree that our problems really aren't intractable, but the way we fight them makes it a lot more difficult and maybe makes them intractable, irreconcilable?
I certainly agree with the second one.
I think that both sides in the abortion have gone to extremes. You have groups that want to totally outlaw it. They want to make it a case of as soon as a heartbeat is heard in the fetus, which is very early. A lot of people don't even know they're pregnant at that point, like me. So the other extreme is abortion is legal all the way through pregnancy. And that is very unacceptable to me. So how we can get people somewhere in the middle. What are they going to do about abortion by medication? What will happen with all the rights of various religious employees? Think of Hobby Lobby, whatever it's called, deciding that they did not want to buy cover contraceptives for people who work for them, and that is now the law. So where exactly are we going? How can we possibly get out of that bind? Anyone got ideas? Every woman should have contraceptives available to them.
Let's step back from this the
Yeah.
abortion and look at how we're looking at all issues right now. And I don't know if any of you have been following the Thorne Sparkman lectures during Lent this year, but I've been enjoying them because they're free. And the speaker this past Wednesday night was the Lutheran bishop for East Tennessee. And he put forward a notion that sort of hit me between the eyes because I thought it was so obvious, but I hadn't recognized it. And that was that the pandemic has totally blown civility out the window, because we are no longer gathering. You no longer look your opponent in the face, hold conversations. We communicate with each other by tweets, well, by social media, and people just let fly with really, ugly comments, and they're not obliged to try to communicate with each other. And that we are, as a nation, we're losing that ability to communicate and discuss in a civil manner any issue. Yeah, Deb?
Well, I was going to say, I'm thinking about this in terms of my family. I have as most of you know, a big family, and I'm related to everybody in East Tennessee. And I am somewhat different in that I am of the liberal persuasion, and most of them are not. So I always look at this as, oh, that is my beloved younger brother, whom I took care of and changed his diapers and raised him. And he's speaking all this stuff about my beliefs and coming, that sort of thing. But we kind of have a policy that you don't really discuss that, or you don't level against your sister or your brother. So it's more a violation of just behavior than it is of the actual topic we're talking about. And I think it would help if it got back to your tone is uncivil, your approach is not nice, rather than the actual topic. I mean, I'm just saying, I'm not avoiding the topic. All I'm doing is saying the way you're doing it is not right. So I think we need to hold that how we discuss our differences is more germane to this topic than that we discuss our, than the actual issue. I mean, we could sit there, like for instance, Mary Ellen, and talk about abortion and reproduction issues and go through all of our discussions without making it a personal attack or personal thing. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind. It's maybe we have to love each other like we really are family, but then everyone has to observe that we need to be civil. And I don't know how you can say, yes, we have to keep it that tone, or we can do it ourselves and be a model for other people. And I know that's asking a lot, but to try to do things and with civil discourse is the term, I know, but to be that way, and, you know, other people have to follow that way. But I've actually had people come back at family gatherings after a big spark or conflagration and apologize for doing that. And I thought that was a very good outcome.
I agree.
So, but I'm just saying we don't need to lose sight that being that the basic relationships of being citizens together, or being people in the same country, and being state, in Tennessee and all that, and Tennesseans together, or Oak Ridgers together, or Episcopalians together is most important, and not that particular issue. So I guess that's my take on it, but I have to live with it every time.
Well, and that's true with all relationships, and I agree with you, Deb, completely, that we have to be able to communicate in therapeutic ways where you're not having contempt and not being defensive, but you're able to listen and to respect each other's thoughts. And it comes down just like you would do in a relationship with people, that are close to you. Then you need to do it with your larger family and then your larger community too. And it's a challenge because we get so defensive or opinionated, and our insecurities and our thoughts and so many things that make us human beings, and relating with each other, is definitely a challenge.
Yes, it is.
About these issues, whether it be healthcare, abortion, environment, whatever, there's more than just two sides to a coin. You have opinion A from this person, opinion B from this person, opinion C from this person, and it's different things. It's not a cut and dry topic, or any topics are cut and dry. You have so many facets and so many life stories in this stuff. What happens if we're talking to this person and this happens to her, or this happens to him? And if you have it cut and dry, it's going to make things worse, not better.
Even among the Episcopalians, where two or three are gathered together, there will be 6 or 7 opinions.
Yes.
But what will become the law? That's really the issue.
Say that again, Mary Ellen.
What will become law?
On these different issues, whether it be healthcare or immigration or abortion, ultimately what becomes law, and how do we talk to each other in that lawmaking process to really keep our democracy intact and not revert to
Civil and yet
authoritarian. Yeah.
be honest with each other.
Yeah. And what we've talked about is modeling the importance of us really understanding the difference between conversation, which is a two-way exchange of information, versus communication or pontification of positions, educating ourselves, really grounding ourselves in our faith and what it means to be a Christian, and then carrying that into these opportunities for revelation and for exchange, and hopefully productive exchange. I really have a hard time getting past Ray's comment about the ways that we are addressing our issues seem to make them unresolvable.
Yeah, I agree.
And that troubles me.
It's really strange that this was one of the topics in the video that he spoke about, because either today or maybe yesterday when I took a walk, I was thinking about, the Capitol and the extremists that took that over. And I was comparing it just by my experience to when in the 90s, I lived in New York City, and I was living on Staten Island at a home for unwed mothers. And it was started by a couple that had worked at Covenant House where I had worked. And they opened this home for unwed mothers. And, you know, a lot of these people, you know, had bombed abortion clinics. And I believe I remember doctors being killed. And, you know, it was all in the name of what they stood for. I mean, to the bitter end, evidently. And so I don't know why that came to my mind, but it did. So I felt like I should share that. I think a lot of that's driven by fear. I mean, I believe it's all driven by fear myself. But anyway, that's just my opinion. So thanks for letting me share that.
The most recent thing in the Congress was the COVID relief bill, $1.9 trillion. That's a lot of bucks. Passed 50 to 49. There are 50 senators on each side of the aisle. One of the Republican senators was absent. Otherwise, it would have been 50-50 with a tiebreaker from the vice president. Ain't nobody budging on some of these things. They simply are not budging.
Mm.
And that makes it really, really hard to deal with. Because I cannot believe that people on the Republican side, that everybody is against that.
That's right.
And I don't believe that everybody on the Democratic side is for it. I just don't believe that. But you know, they've chosen sides and they've chosen teams. So there's going to be a lot of 50-50 with a tiebreaker. Issues come up.
And no-shows tend to be important too. Don't you think that no-show wasn't sick? You know, the no-show was a statement in itself. I'm not.
No, the no-show, it was, he had a death in the family.
Okay, well then I'm wrong. I'd get bitter about it, you know, not only
no,
they
I
just get
understand.
so rigid, and then the rigidity, like you say, is just a problem.
It's a problem.
I can understand the death in the family. I can
Certainly.
understand if you're really sick. But we have no shows at work ourselves that they just don't show up for no reason, good reason, and it just makes it harder for the rest of us.
I'm thinking about what Dan just said and thinking about something we just heard in the video where Dan, hitting a single isn't acceptable. Everything has to be a home run. So whatever side you've assigned yourself to, you may not veer from that path at all, because that's viewed by many, many people on your side as a surrender, not a compromise.
You're a weasel.
Right. And I think those 2 points from the video are very, very applicable right now.
It breaks it down to.
It's taking us down.
I want to offer a thought. I think that mentality is itself the problem.
What mentality?
The mentality of all or nothing. I want 100%, or I will have nothing.
I know. Where did it come from, David?
I don't know. I mean, I think it comes from a country that is in schism, and I think it comes from the need to project onto other people the things we hate about ourselves. And I think that need, this is a country that was founded, remember, in opposition to something. It was founded in opposition to the United Kingdom, to Britain. And if your identity is in opposition, that is not integrated. And I think so it is hard to say, but it could be that it is so bred into our DNA in terms of the history of our country of starting out as an opposition to something that now we're opposing ourselves internally. I don't know. I mean, I haven't thought through deeply what's going on in the country, but that could be part of it.
It could also be, I think, a deliberately designed tactic that we had talked about before for people to entrench their positions.
The anthropologist in me sees it as a gradual process away from print and written medium where you actually have thoughtful, long, lengthy, thoughtful discussions, whether they make sense or not. But still, you go from the print media to people doing stuff quicker, faster, and more visually. And this is where it gets harder to convey these shades of gray and things like that. Historically, as far as where things get ratcheted up, I'm not flinging things at Republicans, but Newt Gingrich and the contract with America and the fact that they wanted people to start using phrases and adjectives and things like that in their communications that, made the opposite view seem radical or seem,
Labels.
labels, right. So that whole thing where it went from anybody that's been involved with debating, like in high school in the 70s or late 60s, you said your honorable opponent, and you had so many rules with debating where you had to act as if your opponent was acting in good faith, and not deal with the person, but deal with the aspect of what they were saying. So now it's all it's quick sound bites. It's not, to me, that any kind of surprise that our previous president was from television, and basically was an act, could come out like a character and create a character, because this was all within the medium. And so I'm a firm believer that the medium became the message, and that we don't really have a lot of discourse. And now with social media, you have where people are actually creating them aspects of themselves, projecting the aspects, dealing with aspects like that. Anyway, and you can have anonymity, which previously was a little harder to get, I think. So it's the anonymity and almost like a secret self, of, stuff where people would say, well, I didn't really mean it, but yes, you did, because you stated it. Anyway, just saying that. And I'm sorry if I'm not more concrete, because I'm not an early person.
That's
And
all
anything
right.
before 1 o'clock is early for me.
Great. Thanks for speaking up.
Wanted to share something too, and this is not the origins of it, but just experiences. I remember my mom, some of you know, she was the juvenile court judge in Chattanooga for a long time when she first went into office in the early 1990s. It wasn't her, but it was somebody we knew who was also an elected position, had a scathing editorial written about them in the Chattanooga newspaper. And our friend in the office called up the editor of the local newspaper. They called, hashed it out, still didn't come eye to eye on what the viewpoint was. But the point was it was a critique, and it was certainly for political points, but it was, at the end of the day, they could still have a relationship. One of the things I observed last year on a somewhat different front, but kind of related to, Deb, you talked about print and media and how it affects things. All the reputation about youth sports and how parents can go crazy. Well, I am one of those parents now, not the crazy ones, but but observing what happens sometimes on ball fields. My son was playing the T-ball league in the fall over in Knoxville, not on our field, but on the one behind us. This is 5 and 6 year olds playing, keep in mind. there was a parent who was screaming at the coach on the other team for not putting their kid at the position it could be. A couple of the parents came over and calmed him down, supposedly, but then I was only a third party witness and saw a few of the posts. This dad went on Facebook, the one who was angry, and started calling out all these people. And it just became this big social media war to where they wound up having to remove this kid and his parents from the fields. It couldn't be in it. Now there's a lawsuit, apparently, from what I understand, going on. Those two things are a microcosm of just the fact that, as a couple of y'all have mentioned with Facebook, and I've told stories obviously the last 2 weeks, you can say something and then you can hide in anonymity, or you can say, well, what I say on Facebook doesn't really count because, or if you get mad at it, then that's on you. And it's, there's no desire for relationship. It's simply a desire to zing people, either to back away or to continue to zing on them until you have quote unquote destroyed them or made your point has won the day. And I don't know where that started, but you know, somebody who's now in his early 40s, I mean, I can see the development in my lifetime of how it has gone from, can very much be at odds at each other politically, will be in a relationship, to one cross word with someone now can make someone a lifetime bitter enemy. I don't know exactly why that is.
I agree a lot with what David said. I really think our roots, our origins are very violent, and we have. But I also think there's some. I've said it before. There's some very serious problems that are getting more and more serious. One's the income inequality. The other is the fact that we in this group are going to be a minority sometime in the next 20 or 30 years. And we've run the show for 200 years. And that's the source of a problem. I must have just, this is not an argument, but I'm struck by the fact that the bulk of the Republican Party comes from, one, very rich people who like the income inequality. Number two, violent white people who resent the fact that they're getting less and less rich, wealthy, and having opportunities. Who are lying to form the opposition.
Add to that the fact that we can't talk to each other.
I was going to give an example of that. I think that's a serious problem. I have a group that we used to meet for lunch at Panera's every Friday. We now meet on Zoom. And we discussed this topic one day. How do we get to talk with each other? So we invited one of the city's leading libertarians to lunch with us. She came and we had a very nice conversation. Whenever we started the beer over to, let's talk about what's going on, she would change the topic or we would change the topic. At the end of the day, we parted, we've had a good time. We hadn't discussed one bit of substantive. And I think that's a real problem.
Well, the old saying that not talking about politics has made us very bad about talking about politics.
I remember used to having lunch with a couple of friends years ago, almost every Sunday after church before they moved away. Sometimes we get to talking about politics, stuff like that. We don't always see eye to eye in politics. We tend to vote differently and all. But for us to come in, eat every Sunday, Sunday in, Sunday out, is saying a lot.
Break bread together.
Yes.
Yeah, you still value each other as people.
Mm-hmm. And that's what's missing, is valuing each other as humans.
I think that's earlier, I was reflecting on what you said, Teddy, but earlier, the fact that my family will dampen down angry political discourse because we value each other as family. I mean, when I address my brothers, I value them as my brothers first, and then maybe as Trump supporters second.
Yeah,
but they come first as my brothers. So, you know, and I have just their whole lives and my whole life. You know, it's really, that's more important. I think a lot of people really don't have those important relationships as much. And that's kind of sad. I think, or have it so rarely. It's maybe some of that. So anyway, just thinking.
So much is what media people listen to. There's such a, there's pretty big dichotomies between the right and the left on media. And then you've got these other things like QAnon and so on, which go beyond that into conspiracies. And they consume the.
Well, it's possible for people to live in their, they talk about the bubbles. You live in your own bubble, and you listen to the sources you want, and you read the columnists you want, and you watch the news things that you agree with you. You don't necessarily hear, the opposite opinion or whatever. It would be good if we did more, I think, or I did more without wanting to punch somebody out, but
Well, if there weren't so many biases in the media, then you could not have to go to all of your different sources, and that really causes a division, I think. Besides the mob mentality from social media, I agree with that too, but I definitely think that, and like you say, it's easy for people to be in their bubble because like what you said, and you definitely, since you can't trust the media to not have biases, you do have to take a social responsibility to look at all the different sides and make your own opinions, and people don't tend to do that.
Well, I've had an issue. I've been trying to do that. I've been trying to look at the other side and look at platform and get away from tactics and look at platform. But then what I see in writing is so in opposition to their behavior. I mean, it's just I get angry, and it just kind of screams lies, lies, lies. And then I stop wanting to inform myself because I just can't get past my anger. It's hard, but I'll keep trying.
Well, and then it's hard when you have two, like you talk about family members or whatever, you have two different angry, each person is angry. So that's the problem because of that, and it's like, and then the opinions just consume you, and then you have all this conflict, and you just, because there's anger. And so to get out of that, and I think that the media just stirs that anger up, and it's like, I mean, it's not, I mean, you're looking at the National Enquirer, as a cliche there. And so, it's not really, you don't know what's real and what's not, but whatever it is, it's going to upset you. And then this anger just grows and grows and grows on both sides.
It's fear.
Yeah.
Fear.
Well, things like the National Enquirer, Globe, or whatever it is, what I often do with those magazines is I don't get angry or anything like that, but instead is I poke fun. I make some of my satire out of them.
I have gotten the perspective. I don't watch, Roger and I don't have cable, and we don't have local stations, but we have kind of the philosophy that comedy doesn't lie. I mean, if it's funny, there's a reason it's funny.
Yeah, there's truth in there.
So, and I always wonder why you don't have, most of the comedians that are out there are comedians that one would see of the liberal persuasion, for the most part, and not the other side. It's like, and if you're making fun of the way like that Trump behaved or something, that, I mean, that was funny, that was a laugh. And it's like I don't know how to say this, but I really don't think comedy lies in any respect. If it's absurd and it's untrue and you laugh, that laugh is a very valid response.
Connie and I were talking a little bit yesterday, and we were talking about how things that are funny they're funny because there's an element of truth in there.
Mhm.
I'm going to wrap us up because we are approaching 11:30, and we've got the communion distribution going on.
And there goes my communion man.
Before we leave the discussion part, I just wanted to share a thought here, and this came from my reading daily meditation from Oswald Chambers today, the Scottish theologian from last century. And as we here are tackling the things that divide us and trying to heal those, we need to remember that we are recipients, and here's the quote, of the undeserved, limitless miracle of the love of God, and that love that was exhibited on the cross of Calvary. And because we are recipients of this powerful, miraculous love, that in all things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. So as we tackle these experiences of life, whether they're the everyday events or whether they're terrifying ones or whether they're how to conduct civil discourse, there's nothing that can separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ and the power that's behind that. So let us remember that we're and ground ourselves in that as we go forward here. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint real quick. The resources that we had shared this week, Mary brought to our attention from the Episcopal Church a way to enter into conversation. So you can look that up and engage in experientially in conversations. We saw Richard Rohr's daily meditation for last week, learning how to see, and especially the one day last week on different definitions of biases that affect how we see things. And then Celeste Headley is a great resource. She has a TED Talk that's only about 10 minutes long, and there's a podcast that came out recently that's about an hour long. But it's very, very insightful on the different dynamics of how to have an effective conversation. And I really put that out there for you to learn.
It was very good. I recommend it.
It was.
Yeah.
It was excellent.
Yeah. And then we have our we can list that we're continuing to work on. So with that, we will go through our prayer, and I'll just leave it open to someone else to start.
Almighty God, giver of all good things, we thank you for the natural majesty and beauty of this land. They restore us, though we are often to destroy them.
Heal us.
Heal us.
We thank you for the great resources of this nation. They make us rich, though we often exploit them. Forgive us.
We thank you for the men and women who have made this country strong. They are models for us, though we often fall short of them.
Inspire
us.
Torch of liberty, which has been lit in this land. It has drawn people from every nation, though we have often hidden from its light.
Enlighten us.
Thank you for the faith we have inherited in all its rich variety. It sustains our life. Though we have been faithless again and again, renew us.
Renew us.
Renew us.
And then together, help us.
Help us, O Lord, finish the good work you have begun.
Strengthen our
efforts.
Blot out
ignorance
and prejudice,
and to
abolish poverty
and crime.
hasten the day when
and hasten the day
all
People
with
many
many voices
voices
and one in
Unite
accord
for us.
will glorify your
Glorify
holy name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, everybody, have a super week, and we'll see you next week.